Hello and welcome to an introduction to the use of corpus tools, or what are called language corpora. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to use online collections of texts to find useful linguistic information. These are texts that have been purposely designed for you to explore linguistic patterns in English. To some extent, the use of Google, as I showed in the previous video, to do a little linguistic detective work, is kind of using uh, Google as a corpus, as a source of online texts. But what I'll be showing you today are tools that have been created specifically for language exploration. You may be familiar with images like this. This is what is commonly known as a word cloud. And you notice that there are some words that are bigger than others on here. And if you kind of just have a glance at this, you can pretty much guess the source or the kind of text from which this image was derived. And it did come from this Wikipedia entry, Online Learning in Higher Education, which is probably pretty much what you guessed. And what you see in this image is that basically the larger the word, the more common it was in the source text. And that's pretty much the basic idea behind the use of corpus tools. It's a lot to do with frequency. It's a lot to do with looking for patterns, especially frequency-driven patterns in the text. And very generally, the more volume of text you have, the more useful the information. Although there are some caveats, which I'm going to talk about in a later video with regard to that. A corpus therefore is basically a collection of texts, and corpus tools are electronic interfaces that help you find linguistic patterns in text. One of the linguistic tools I'll be talking about today, the first one is SKEL, which is Sketch Engine for Language Learning. Here is the web address for that. So let's go there. If you don't go directly to the link that I showed you in the slide, you can just Google SKEL. And the first link that you get usually when you type in SKEL is this one. That's what you should be looking at. And what you see here is a menu of options here at the top. Examples, word sketch, similar words, more features, more languages. So let's put in an academic word like finding as a noun, as in research findings. And I'll look for that. And what is retrieved is, first of all, you see the word finding here, but we don't know if it's being used here as a verb or a noun. What we do see is its frequency per million, so how often it occurs in the text that it's collected, which is in the millions for this corpus. And each of these lines here are lines from actual authentic material, different source texts that have been collected for this for this corpus, so different source files. So here you have, and this can be useful just to find examples, lots of examples beyond the typical dictionary examples that you might find in the dictionary, such as the one-look dictionary that I showed in another video. So here you see one early finding has immediate practical value, but then you see in number 2, here are 5 fresh local projects worth finding. And so here you have kind of a noun use, and here you have a verbal use. So what you can do is if you click on word sketch here, finding is as a noun, and so the linguistic information here will be specifically for a noun. And here you see, for example, verbs with the word finding as a subject. And you might think, well, that's not very useful. Well, actually it can be, because what's here, you go back to the concept of frequency. These words here, these verbs, are presented first in accordance with their frequency, so how they collocate remember we talked about the word collocation in a previous video, how commonly these words collocate with the word finding. And to check what they mean by this is you can click on suggest, and then you can see the pattern that is being um, evinced in this the suggestion here, or this collocation. So this finding suggests money does not cause long-term happiness. These findings suggest an increasing trend towards family disruption during childhood. And you also have verbs with finding as an object. So again, you can click on that. And so these findings are summarized in figure 3. A tertiary source summarizes findings, etc. Adjectives with finding, the most common one apparently is preliminary. The findings are preliminary. Task force cautions findings are preliminary. And modifiers of findings. So, oops. So apparently research finding is a common pattern. The research findings on particular works are constantly published. Our research findings put this trend into perspective. This chapter has presented my main research findings, and so on. So that's the most common collocation with finding. And modifiers of finding, nouns modified by finding, and other patterns that you can identify. So you can see how that can be useful to help you identify collocation, which I mentioned in a previous video, can make your writing sound more natural, in the sense that using the most formulaic, we talked about how academic writing can be formulaic, most formulaic uses of academic terms and phraseology. You can also look at words that are similar. So you see that it does a little word cloud for you as well of these synonyms, and you find other candidates that can be used um, as an alternative if you want to find something that not sound so repetitive, which is a common problem when one is writing. And so I'll stop there with Scale. I think Scale is a pretty useful tool and a good example of what is a corpus tool, how one can use corpus data. The next tool I'd like to show you is a bit of maybe not as user-friendly a tool, but it can do more for you. This is something called word and phrase. It's based on a corpus called the COCA corpus, the Corpus of Contemporary American English. It's a huge corpus in the millions and millions and millions of words. And let me show you how that works. So if you just Google word and phrase, you usually get this as a top hit. And you're given two options. On the left here, frequency list, and on the right, input and analyze text. So let's start first with frequency list. Okay, now here, I'm going to go ahead and just put in the word that we used in the scale corpus example. And here you can see that I can select, since I don't want any verbs or adjectives or anything, or verbs I guess in this case, I only want the noun form of finding. I can click here and that's what it gives me. But different from scale, it also shows me the frequency, the relative frequency in different types of written language. So spoken, different type of discourse. So spoken, fiction, magazine, newspaper, and academic. And as you can see here with this darkest blue, it means that it's the most common, which is also reflected down here in this bar chart, where you can see the academic use of finding as a noun is by far the most common. We'll come back to that in a second. Down here, you see findings or finding. Apparently, it's mostly especially common in its plural form. This, in the middle of this text, is what's called a quick concordance. So it's a keyword in context. And so it is the node word here. And as a node word, you can see it's kind of patterning. It's lexical and grammatical patterning. So that alone is interesting. It can be useful. But the examples, as you can see here on the side, are different things. You see spoken examples and you see magazine examples. If I want to see only academic corpus lines, I can just click on this bar chart here. And as you can see now, the genre has switched to academic only. And not only that, if I go to the left of the node word or to the right, I can see um, that these words that are in boxes, I can click on them. Or in different colors, I can click on them. So if I click on the word promising here, I can see other examples of promising findings. Okay, let me go back. I can see other collocates here, though. Consistent, previous. These are listed in order of frequency, so the most frequent first. And also, if I click on consistent with finding, again, it's only here. It's a mix of genres, but mostly academic. So I can see the patterning of consistent finding, the way it collocates with the word consistent collocates with the word finding. And to the left here, it's given me very conveniently synonyms to be used with finding. And if I want to find out how to use those synonyms, I can just click on one of them, like conclusion. And it gives me conclusion as a node word here, but if it's got a mixed bag of genres, if I only want academic, I can see just academic examples of the word conclusion as a synonym to finding. Also, word and phrase, going back to the first screen that you saw, allows me to, as an option, input or analyze text. And you're going to see how this can also be quite useful. So that article that I showed you earlier that drove the word cloud, online learning and higher education, I can copy some text here and put it into word and phrase. I'm just going to copy that in. And then when I put in search here, in just a few seconds, it gives me what's called a lexical profile. And what this shows me is basically how complex this text is, because here you see that 61% of that text from the Wikipedia article is comprised of the 500 most common, the 1 to 500 range of the most common words in English. So that's the bulk of it. 20% is comprised of a range between the words that feature in a frequency list between ranked 501 to 3000. So what you see is that a full 81% of the text is actually made up of common words, relatively common words in English. And then above that range, there's 16%, which is maybe more specialized, less common words. Okay. So what I can do is I can click on any word of these that are, well, actually any word in this text, and I can see examples from Coca like we saw earlier. So let's say that in this range here, I'm not familiar with a lot of these words you'll already be familiarized with. Then maybe these here less so. And let's say for example, I'm not sure about the word learner or setting. And so similar to that first option that we saw with frequency lists, I have a quick collocation here. I have genre information, and I can click on that, and I can see only academic uses of this word setting, and I can see uh, that the most common collocates of setting are urban, in this order: urban, social, different, natural, and so on. And again, I can click on these and see lots of examples of that of that collocation. And so this is really good to do further exploration and vocabulary development, actually. Uh, and it also is also useful, uh, not with this text I put in, but if you grab your own text and put them in here, you can begin to develop specialized uh, vocabulary, more advanced vocabulary in this lower frequency range here, that is specifically suited to your particular discipline. So phrases and terminology that you may not otherwise notice or may not be familiar with. Furthermore, uh, the words that are in green here, which would represent sort of a mid-frequency range, you might find that, hey, there's some words here that I'm not familiar with that are green that I feel I should know because they're in that mid-frequency range. And let's say you didn't know the word primarily, you can click on that and start building your vocabulary as well. And I can see that um, as a node word here. Again, I can click on it, academic, and see only academic if I want. Um, and I have the synonyms to the left. So you can see that largely, if you get tired of using the word primarily, you can choose one of these here and see how frequent they are as well. And click on largely, for example, I see that it's also mostly academic. Okay, up here, last thing I'm going to show you is that you can also see lists. And so if I click on that, what I see here are in that text that I just inputted here, that Wikipedia text, I can see a breakdown of what these words are. So if you want to, make a vocabulary list for yourself of terminology, and see where they are in terms of how COCA ranks them. The lower range, the less frequent ranges, is this over below the top 3,000 words. You see there are 8 examples of asynchronous, 7 examples in the text of learner, so 7 instances of learner, 7 instances of assist, or interact, or interaction, synchronous, and so on. And you can also see, therefore, which ones are particularly common in a particular discipline. These here are words that only appeared once in the text. That doesn't mean that they're not necessarily useful, but obviously the ones that are the most frequent would be an indication that these are terms that would be more important for you to learn in your particular discipline. Certainly down here in the range 2, which is the sort of mid-range frequency, you would expect to need to know these more frequent ones here if you don't know them already. And down here, I mean, I would expect that anybody taking this course would know words in this frequency range for sure. Okay. So that pretty much does it in terms of an introduction to corpora and how to use ready-made corpora. Those are tools that I hope you find useful in addition to the tools that have already been presented in this module. Next, uh, I will be talking about something I'm especially excited about that I find to be really the most useful of all, which is how to create your own corpus or your own corpora, collections of text, and how to analyze those with text from your particular discipline.